Today's episode, we are joined by John Rogers from Disability Driving Instructors. John has spent over 30 years working as a driving instructor, primarily working with disabled learners in adapted vehicles. John has a wealth of knowledge and experience around this topic, and that's what he spoke about today in the episode, from his experience and career within the industry to how you can get involved as a driving instructor. What are some of the adaptations that you can get in your vehicle? And what are some of the adaptations available to learners? So, a lot of content, but more importantly, they need more driving instructors using adapted vehicles so that learners needing an adapted vehicle have someone to go to get their freedom, their independence, and get on the road behind the wheel. So, a insightful episode, lots of knowledge shared by John, and an episode that I really enjoyed. So I hope you guys enjoy it too. John, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. How are you?
Excellent. Thank you, Josh. And thank you very much for inviting me. So, looking forward to an interesting armchair discussion.
Me too. We've spoke quite a lot. I found myself on your website. It was a while ago now, and it highlighted the need for driving instructors helping learners with disabilities. So I know a little bit about what you do, and we've had some quite in-depth conversations in the past. But what I would like you to do for the audience that maybe haven't come across you previously, can you give us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Okay, I certainly do that. Right, I am a retired driving instructor. Um, Unfortunately, I seem to be working harder since I've retired than I was when I was working as a driving instructor, but that's another story. I spent 35 years teaching people to drive. Before that, I was a pub manager, restaurateur, chef, you name it. I did it in the catering trade, but then I got very disillusioned with the catering trade when the money men took over the breweries and decided to jump ship and didn't know what to do. And I saw the proverbial advert in the newspaper, which said something along the lines of, do you like people? Do you like driving? Do you like teaching them people to drive? Yeah. And I thought, well, yes, yes, and yes, I think so. And so I went and had an interview, and then that was it. I managed to pass all three exams at the first attempt. Started teaching people initially in a manual car, right, and then one of the guys who was doing the disability instruction for BSM was unfortunately taken ill, and I took over his car for a while, and then he came back, and then I took it over again, and then he came back. And when that happened the third time, I says, "Look, I'll do it, but I want to keep the car." And so I started doing disability instruction full time. Continued working for BSM for about 3 years, I think, and then decided to branch out on my own, but to stay with the disability instruction. By then I'd built up a nice little niche market in South Yorkshire, North Derbyshire, that sort of area, um, and it worked very well. So that's how I came into the industry of teaching people to drive, and the disability side of it was purely by accident, right? But at that time, there was, well, there still is very little formal training with regard to teaching instructors about disability. When I started, there was nobody. Yeah, so basically, I had to teach myself. Yeah, which was interesting. It was interesting, but it's something that I found that I really enjoyed. Um, it is really satisfying when you see any of your pupils reaching the end of the journey of learning to drive, going in and taking their driving test and coming out with that pass certificate. that's a very satisfying part of the job. But when you've got somebody who has really, really struggled, right, and you maybe have got somebody who learning to drive and getting a car is going to make so much difference because it's going to give them independent mobility, right? When I think back to one person I taught to drive, she was a young girl with spina bifida, full time wheelchair user. She didn't do anything for herself. She didn't do anything for herself. She was always assisted to do anything. So when we started learning to drive, I had to teach her how to cross the road. Yeah, and we did that. We did that with her in the wheelchair and me on foot. Yeah, because you know, it was that basic thing of teaching her what is a safe gap for you to be able to get across there. Yeah, because she always went out with her parents or with her sister, or with friends, and they always pushed the wheelchair, and she didn't have any say in it. So she never learnt about finding a safe gap in the traffic. And if she was out on her own, she always went to a traffic light control pedestrian crossing and she pressed the button and waited till the little green man came on and then she would wheel herself across the road. All right. But she had to be taught how to find a gap so that she could get herself across the road where there were no pedestrian crossings. And that was how the driving lessons started. When I started with her, she lived at home. Her mother did everything for her. Her father did everything for her. Her sister did everything for her. She didn't do anything for herself. She was totally reliant on the family. Yeah. By the time we finished, she had moved out to the family home. She'd got herself a little bungalow in a warden patrolled complex down in the town centre. Right, she'd got herself a little motability car. Yeah, she had got a motability car with a wheelchair carrier on the roof. Right, so she was totally independent. She could wheel the wheelchair up to the car, hook the wheelchair up to the winch, and that would load it up into the roof and get herself in and out of the car. Right, she was totally independent. The only trouble was I was trying to do Pass Plus with her and trying to find her at home to do the Pass Plus lessons was almost impossible because she was always out gallivanting around with her mates. Yeah, a totally changed individual. And that makes it so satisfying when you can see that the work that you've put in and the work that she's put in has changed somebody's life. Yeah, and that was one of the reasons why I really found that teaching disabled people to drive was my niche, if you like. Yeah. Okay. Right. From there, I continued with the driving school. I developed the driving school. We ended up at its biggest, having myself and three other driving instructors working with me. Um, and then and then one day I was doing some familiarization training with, it was at the time when the little blue invalid carriages, if you remember the little blue invalid carriages, the little three wheelers. Yeah. Okay. They've sort of they've hit the headlines again because one of the MPs for reform says that every disabled person should be issued with one of these. I mean, they were death traps. They really were, and they were rattly old things. They only took one person, so you weren't allowed to take any passengers. Okay, right, but they were taken off the road. And the problem was, if you had learned to drive in one of these invalid carriages, you only had a motorbike license. And the idea was that every invalid carriage driver was going to be given the opportunity of having a proper car from Motability. But to do that, they had to pass their driving test again because they only had motorbike licenses, right? And we were involved in doing a lot of the retraining to get these guys up to the required standard to get them through a test after they've been driving for years without any real and anybody there looking at their abilities. Yeah. Okay. So we were involved with that, and I was doing some retraining for one of these guys, and they had had an assessment at the assessment centre in Derby where they assess people's physical ability, eyesight, cognitive skills, everything else. They'd had the assessment down there. They'd identified the controls that they thought were going to be suitable for this person to be able to retrain and take their driving test again. And I'd started the tuition with this lady, yeah, and I'd come to a different conclusion. Yeah, I'd come to the conclusion that a different sort of adaptation was required for this person. Yeah. All right. And I felt a little bit guilty. So I rang up the manager of the assessment centre and I said to him, okay, I got a little bit of a problem with one of your clients that you've referred to me. And I explained the situation. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, he says, I will take your word for it because I trust you more than I trust my assessor. Right. And I was then on the telephone with this guy for well over half an hour, talking about everything under the sun. Yeah. Right. And I was getting the interrogation technique coming across the telephone line from this guy. And I put the phone down at the end of it and I looked across and I spoke to my late wife and I said, I feel like I've just been interviewed for a job. And she turned to me and she said, well, would you like to work for him? I said, well, be nice. There'll be a change. It'll be different. It'll be nice working somewhere else. And so I ended up working at the assessment centre for the next 17 years, I think it was. Yeah, so I was working in Derby as a driving assessor, 2 days, then 3 days a week, and the rest of the time working for myself with my own driving school. And so it carried on, but that gave me the benefit of learning so much more about medical conditions, about how to deal with the medical conditions, about things to look for. I mean, I was employed as the consultant's ADI, right? So the consultant that ran the assessment centre, right? I was his ADI, and I used to come in the morning, right, and I would sit in the office, and half an hour to an hour later, the door would open and we'd start the assessments. Yeah. I mean, the poor little customer who'd been sitting in the waiting room for the past 3/4 of an hour, that was nothing. Yeah. The important thing was that the consultant wanted to explain everything about the medical conditions of these people that I was going to see on that particular day. And he taught me so much. He taught me so much. And the time I was at the assessment centre, we developed various training courses, and I went on loads of training courses down in London, at, uh, at Banstead and at Crowthorne. Yeah, we did all sorts of training courses, and then the assessment. It was the Forum of Mobility Centres there. Then they started to develop an education program in conjunction with Greenwich University. Yeah. Okay. And I did that education, or two levels of that education course, as well as the training courses. So I did an awful lot of training, but that sort of stood me in good stead for later on when I'm providing the training courses for other people. Yeah, which is what we're doing now, disability driving instructors. So disability driving instructors, right, it's an online information and advice service. All right, that was the reason it was set up. Okay, we set it up, what, 13, 14 years ago, I suppose. And we set it up as with that in mind, set up an independent online information and advice service. But also as part of that, we wanted to develop an ADI register of specialist instructors who were trained and capable of teaching the disabled people to drive. And when I say teaching disabled people to drive, we're not just talking about people with physical disabilities. We're also talking about people with learning difficulties. We're talking about people with developmental conditions like autism, Asperger's, those sort of conditions. And we're talking about teaching people to drive who've got hearing difficulties or are completely deaf, right? So those are the three areas of disability that we're talking about. Um, shouldn't really call people with hearing difficulties disabled, because they don't consider that they're disabled. They just have a communication difficulty, right? But the other two areas are more real disabilities. Okay. Um, when we set up disability driving instructors, it was set up. Um, it was set up, as I say, in 2013. Yeah, with a grant from Motability. Okay, so we had the grant to set it up, to set the website up and running, to get the ADI register up and running. Yeah, okay. It was initially set up as being part of Driving Mobility, which is the charity that accredits and looks after all the independent driving assessment centres up and down the UK. But we are independent of Driving Mobility, right? Okay, it was set up in partnership, but we're independent of them. But we work very much arm in arm with them. Okay, um, but that's how disability driving instructors was set up. Right, it's there to help the disabled people who want to learn to drive or get back to driving after accident and illness. But it's also there to support the specialist driving instructor and to help develop the instructors who want to specialise in doing disability tuition. Right now, for the past how long? 3 years, I suppose. We've been running online training courses. Um, we've been we've been running the training course for educational needs. Yeah, with specific educational needs, and the training course for disabilities and medical conditions, which looks at more the physical disability side of things. And we've been running those courses for the past 3 years. Okay, we are currently running our first deaf awareness and sign language course, which has taken a lot of hard work. And I would take now the time to thank the people who have put all that hard work in, right? Because it hasn't been me. I've done a lot of work on the other courses, right? Okay, right. But my colleague Lee Pollard, Mike Gambin down in London, Costa Cristal, yeah, they're the guys who've done the really hard work with the sign language and deaf awareness course, right? And I take my hat off to them because they've done an awful lot of hard work. But that is now running with our first course. We got it running again in June of next year. We're going to be doing specific educational needs courses in January, the deaf awareness course in June, and then we'll be doing the disabilities and medical course towards the autumn of next year. Okay, and I'm sure that Josh would be able to put up the details of those courses for those people that are interested on them. There are courses that are run, classroom courses that are run by Driving Mobility that cover very similar syllabus to our courses. But we were very mindful of the fact that if somebody wants to do a classroom course, which is going to be sort of 2 days or 3 days or even 4 days in duration, right, and is probably at the other end of the country, that means that an ADI is going to lose virtually a full day, a full week's worth of work, a full week's worth of income, and then they've got to drive halfway across the country to get to the venue that's doing the course, and then they've got to spend a load of money on hotel accommodation and food whilst they're there, so that is why we decided to do our courses online, so that the ADI, yes, he has to give up an hour and a half to 2 hours of their time every Wednesday night, but all they have to do is go downstairs and switch the computer on, right? And then they can go and spend the night in their own bed, and they don't have to pay for it. Yeah. Okay. So it makes it financially more easier to justify, right? But it also it means you're not disrupting your business by taking too long away from your business, right? And I mean that's important, and it's worked very well with the online training that we're doing. What I'm proposing is to take the online training a stage further. So at the moment, we're just doing online training. I want to move that on to the next stage of doing an accreditation scheme so that the ADIs who are doing the training can then accredit themselves by demonstrating that they are putting what they have learnt in theory in the training, yeah, into practice with the teaching. Okay, so by demonstrating that they are teaching these people to drive using the information that they have learnt on the training courses, that's a form of self accreditation. And then if we're taking that to its ultimate, the education course that I was talking about with Greenwich University, when I was working with driving mobility, we did a similar education course in partnership with Chester University, right, which I completed that training course. More recently, Driving Mobility have done the same sort of partnership with Oxford Brookes University, right, and they're in the process of developing a new a new education course, right, and we are hoping that that will become more available to driving instructors. In the past, the vast majority of people attending the the education courses, have been the assessors who are working in the assessment centres, right? But what we want to do is open it up to driving instructors who want to develop their skills and who want to show that they have learnt what they've been trained, how they've been trained. Yeah. So the idea is that we're looking to get 3 badges. We're looking to get a badge for attending the training course. We're then looking at getting a badge for accrediting what they've learnt in the training course, and then thirdly, they're getting the 3rd badge if they complete the education course, where they've got to have written pieces of work to prove that not only have they listen to the training that they've been given, but they understand it, that they've read around it, and they can then put into practice a written piece of work that can prove what they have done. So those are the 3 levels that I want to do. Okay, I'm very much, that's what I want to do. I've got to persuade the guys at Driving Mobility that that is a good way forward. Yeah, right? And I can help to justify what I'm saying, by saying, okay, since 2023, we've got 30 driving instructors who are teaching disabled people to drive on the road. Yeah, we've got 30 driving instructors who have adapted their cars so that people with physical disabilities can learn to drive in those cars. Right? We've got an awful lot more than that who are teaching people with educational needs who don't need to adapt their cars, right? Because the guys with educational needs, they might need an automatic car if driving a manual car is going to cause cognitive overload, but they've got full function in all 4 limbs, so they don't need any adapted controls. Yeah. Okay. You need the adaptive controls if you haven't got full function in all 4 limbs. Now, if you want to drive a manual car, you need 2 good legs to operate the accelerator, the brake, and the clutch. Right. You need 2 good arms to be able to change gear and control and turn the steering wheel and operate the secondary controls. And if any one of those limbs doesn't work properly, right, then that might lead to requiring adaptations to help overcoming the physical disability. Right. So yeah, that's what it's all about. Okay, now one of the things that a lot of people ask me, one of the things that a lot of people ask me is how much does it cost to adapt your car? And is that going to mean that I need two cars, one for teaching a disabled person to drive and one for teaching an able-bodied person to drive? Okay, well, the answer is to the first one, how much is it going to cost to adapt your car? Well, that depends on what you're putting into your car, right? Basic adaptations, like, for example, push pull hand control so that somebody can drive without the use of their legs, a left foot accelerator so somebody with no right leg can drive the car with their left leg, yeah, a steering ball to allow that person who's using hand controls to turn the steering wheel around with one hand and to do that easily, yeah, an indicator switch on the hand controls so that they can operate the indicators whilst they're turning the steering wheel with the steering ball. Okay, so that basic adaptation package of push pull hand controls, left foot accelerator, steering ball, indicator switch on the hand controls, we can get that for £500 plus VAT. Okay, which is about a third of the normal price. So I've worked and colleagues have worked very hard to persuade the adaptation manufacturers and the adaptation fitters to help us to provide adaptations at a reasonable price to encourage more driving instructors to do the work that we need them to do. So £500 to start the ball rolling. If you want to go to the next stage after that, right, you could get a steering ball with a secondary control keypad attached to the steering ball or attached to the steering aids so that you can operate the indicators and the wipers and the horn and the headlamp dip and flash at the same time as controlling the steering with just one hand. Okay, now that is a more expensive adaptation. Okay, but I've worked hard to get the manufacturers to provide that sort of equipment to the extent that there are two manufacturers who are actually providing the secondary control unit free of charge. So they're providing it free of charge to the ADI. All the ADI needs to spend is between 350 and 450 quid to have the control unit fitted. Okay, right. So that means that you can have the whole kabang for approximately £1,000. Approximately £1,000. So it's not a ridiculous amount of money. Yes, you need to be committed to doing it. Maybe you want to do it one step at a time by getting the hand controls and the left foot accelerator first and then moving on to the next stage after that. Yeah. Okay. Beyond that, the world's your oyster, but you can spend as much money as you want, right? You can have a handheld trigger accelerator that is Bluetooth connected to the car, right? So you can just do that with your fingers to operate the accelerator. You could have a lever to operate the brake, right? But that trigger accelerator that you're holding in your hand would probably cost you best part of £1,000. Okay, and some of the more expensive adaptations for people who have got serious disabilities. Say if you've got somebody who is a full-time wheelchair user who cannot transfer from the wheelchair into the car, right? Okay, so they need to be able to have a wheelchair accessible vehicle with a ramp or a lift at the back so that they can drive the wheelchair into the vehicle. They might be able to transfer sideways into a driving seat if it's level access and everything is made as easy as possible. So maybe if you have a van with a sliding driver's seat that can slide all the way back electronically to where the rear seat would be and then rotate about 45 degrees, then you can drive your wheelchair up alongside it and then maybe slide across and into that driver's seat and then power it forward back into a driving position. Or in the worst case scenario, right, you could take out the driver's seat completely and the wheelchair user can drive their wheelchair up into a driving position where there would then be an electric tie down to tie the wheelchair down to the floor, and then they can drive from their wheelchair. Okay. Right, but we're starting to get into silly money with these, and it's not going to be practical for a driving instructor to get one of these vehicles. Yes, there have been a couple of driving instructors who have done that, but it's not really a practical proposition. Okay, but what you may find yourself doing is you may find that somebody in that sort of situation has got Motability funding for a drive from wheelchair accessible vehicle, right? And maybe because they've got very limited function in their upper limbs or in the lower limbs or whatever, right? They're going to need highly complex adaptations, right? Okay. A colleague of mine, he was doing some work with a young lady in Nottingham, right? And she was she was steering with her right foot because that was the only limb that worked. So she had a joystick on the floor which moved from side to side to operate the steering, right? And her left shoulder was in like a caliper attached to the B pillar of the van, and by moving her shoulder backwards and forwards, she was accelerating and braking. Okay, right, and then the secondary controls for the indicators, wipers, that sort of thing, they were operated by a micro switch in the headrest of a wheelchair, right? And what wasn't available that way, they had got some form of voice control to do other secondary ancillary control functions, right? But you're talking there about eye-watering amounts of money to adapt that vehicle, right? It would the final bill for that vehicle you wouldn't have got much change out of £250,000.
Wow.
So it starts off at £500 and it goes up to 250. That's an expensive adaptation, but it means that person is independently mobile. It means that she can carry on her job.
Well done to you. What I would say
Mm.
now, John, before we end up off anywhere else, um, if you've got any final messages, anything that you want to share, you can do that now. I'm going to get all of your contact information and any links that you want put in the description. And
Right.
yeah, we can go from there.
We can go from there. So have a look at the links that Josh is going to provide you. Please feel free to get in touch. As I say, drop me an email. The telephone contact numbers will be in there as well. So if it's easier to talk over the telephone, I'm usually available a lot of the time. So give me a ring if you don't want to drop me an email. But if you're interested at all in exploring disability instruction, yeah, give me a ring. We can talk about it. I can give you pointers to somebody who you can talk to more locally. Yeah. Or if we're doing any shows and the shows are available, then come and see us at the shows. Yeah. If you're interested in taking it further forward with training programs, right, the online training program, it's a good way of starting. You can dip your toe in and you can just do one of them, or you can do both of them, you can do all three of them. Yeah. But it's a good way. It's a good way of starting. It's a good way of starting. It's far better to have somebody providing training and education than trying to do it yourself. There speaks somebody who taught themselves how to do it, because there wasn't any training programs when I started. Okay. The training programs that were available were very limited and would have required me to go down to the south of London to do a training program. I did do it eventually. I did do it eventually, right? But by that time, I'd already taught myself how to do it. Yeah. And especially if it was new bits of adapted kit, it was a case of, right, I take it out and I try it. And I take it somewhere nice and quiet. And then if I make a mistake, I'm not going to cause any great upset. Yeah. Okay, but it's far better if you can have somebody who can explain things properly. So, thank you, Josh, for giving me the opportunity to natter away. Um, and thank you, the audience who is now listening to this recording. Yeah. Um, hope it's informative. And like I say, drop a line, give us a ring. Yeah, we can always have a chat.
Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate your time this evening. Love the episode. Loads of experience and knowledge shared. Lots for me to try and take in as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you, Josh.